Nobody in that studio expected what happened next. The cameras were rolling live. The audience went completely silent. Robert De Niro sat heavily in the chair. He is the legendary tough guy of American cinema. He spent half a century playing unyielding, brutal fighters. But something shifted deep in the room. The 82-year-old actor looked directly ahead. His jaw tightened as the questions landed. Then, the impenetrable armor suddenly cracked. Tears began to stream down his weathered face. He broke down completely on live television. It was a raw, utterly devastating moment. The ultimate Hollywood tough guy was openly weeping. He was weeping for the survival of his country. But before we get to those devastating tears, before we reach the absolute breaking point, you need to understand what caused this massive collapse. You need to see the political dominoes falling. Millions of Americans were taking to the streets. The nation was being pushed to the absolute edge. The truth involves a massive coordinated cover-up. It involves leaked, explosive documents the elite tried to hide. It involves bizarre technological spectacles at the White House. The president was desperately trying to rewrite reality. The people were aggressively refusing to comply. And the ultimate collision course was absolutely inevitable. What came next, nobody saw coming. The tension had been building for grueling months. It started in the dead of the night. The Epstein files were finally, officially unsealed. People stayed awake, reading the massive document drops. They refreshed their screens in pure, unadulterated disbelief. The contents were entirely foul and deeply disturbing. There were endless pages of explicit logs. There were detailed timelines of private flights. There were famous names placing powerful men in rooms with victims. The public demanded immediate, severe accountability. They wanted answers delivered directly under oath. They wanted the brutal truth told clearly and calmly. Instead, the administration deployed a massive cover-up squad. They hid behind expensive lawyers and loud political noise. They desperately hoped the clock would simply save them. But the American people were reading the exact receipts. They saw the protected names of the billionaire elite. They saw Howard Lutnick and others who partied on the island. The excuses provided were absolutely pathetic. The elite claimed they just brought their young kids. They pretended the entire island was no big deal. The hypocrisy was staggering and completely shameless. Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche immediately stepped in. They orchestrated legal moves to protect the most powerful. They transferred Ghislaine Maxwell to club-fed facilities. They softened the blow for the absolute worst offenders. They helped cover up a dark, sick, unforgivable past. The public watched this happen in real time. The simmering anger boiled over into pure rage. The trust in the justice system was completely shattered. But wait, it gets worse. While the elite protected their own dark secrets, the White House was staging a surreal, distracting spectacle. They were putting on a deeply disturbing public show. Melania Trump hosted a highly publicized global summit. The strange event was titled Fostering the Future Together. It was effectively a massive commercial for artificial intelligence. She made a truly unusual, chilling entrance. She did not walk onto the stage alone. She was escorted by a cold metallic machine. It was a humanoid robot officially named Figure 3. The contraption walked right beside the First Lady. It was designed to do laundry and load dishwashers. It was even explicitly designed to teach young children. The optic was completely and utterly dystopian. The French First Lady, Brigitte Macron, was standing nearby. Macron looked visibly confused and deeply uncomfortable. She picked a very weird day to visit Washington. She watched the faceless robot approach with deep suspicion. Then Melania stepped up to the official microphone. She pleasantly informed the room of a terrifying future. She said humans would soon be replaced by humanoids. She claimed artificial intelligence would deliver ultimate utility. The massive room felt immediately ice cold. It was a sneak peek into a totally soulless administration. They wanted robots to raise and teach the children, while real American families were actively struggling to survive. The disconnect from reality was absolutely staggering. Inflation was surging violently across the entire country. People could not afford basic, everyday groceries. They could not afford their monthly rent or housing. And the president? He was playing dangerous games with the electoral system. He was setting a massive, hypocritical trap. 3 days later, the extreme hypocrisy was exposed. A special election was held in Palm Beach, Florida. This was Donald Trump's own heavily protected district. He had won this specific area by double digits. It was supposed to be completely safe for Republicans. He strongly endorsed a Republican candidate named John Maples. Trump demanded total, unwavering loyalty to Maples. He promised Maples would never let the voters down, but Trump was hiding a massive, embarrassing secret. For months, Trump had violently screamed about voter fraud. He claimed mail-in voting was entirely corrupt and rigged. He pushed a brutal bill to ban mail-in ballots nationwide. He called the entire process a complete scam. He forcefully demanded everyone vote strictly in person. But what did he actually do in his own district? He quietly requested a mail-in ballot for himself. He voted by mail from his massive, heavily guarded estate. He used the exact system he was desperately trying to destroy. The independent media caught him completely red-handed. The Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, panicked publicly. Johnson tried to tap dance around the blatant hypocrisy. He claimed Florida's voting system was somehow magically different. He claimed Florida was safe, while California was a madhouse. The desperate excuses were incredibly weak and unconvincing. The voters saw right through the endless lies. The political magic was finally, undeniably wearing off. The election results rolled in late that fateful night. It was a devastating, deeply humiliating upset. A Democrat named Emily Gregory won the race handily. She forcefully flipped a solidly red protected seat. John Maples lost in a truly humiliating defeat. He was sent right back to being a financial planner. The White House was thrown into absolute uncontrolled chaos. Reports immediately leaked of explosive rage inside the building. Tiny fists were allegedly punching holes in the drywall. The administration was losing its iron grip on reality. And then, something truly unexpected happened. The anger at the ballot box spilled directly into the streets. The brutal policies of the regime were actively destroying lives. The administration had rushed into catastrophic, deadly foreign wars. They aggressively allied with Netanyahu to strike Iran. They carelessly dropped massive bombs on elementary schools. They killed 165 innocent little girls. They intentionally attacked vital desalination plants and electrical grids. They committed unspeakable atrocities in Beirut and across Lebanon. They falsely claimed they were the actual party of peace. But the American people saw the massive, bloody death toll. They saw ICE and Border Patrol operating exactly like the Gestapo. They saw innocent people being terrorized on their own streets. The boiling tipping point had finally been reached. The massive grassroots networks officially activated. The organizers fully mobilized in every single American state. The people prepared to make undeniable history. They completely refused to be ruled by political kings. They aggressively refused to be silenced by government fear. The momentum was building at an absolutely unprecedented rate. The independent journalists documented every single step. The Midas Touch network set up live cameras everywhere. They captured the raw outrage growing in Minnesota. They filmed the massive crowds gathering in Chicago. They recorded the fierce resistance exploding in Charlotte, from the streets of Los Angeles to the bridges of Portland. The unified message was growing louder by the hour. The people wanted this despicable, corrupt regime entirely out. March 28th arrived with explosive, undeniable energy. It was the official day of the No Kings protest. It was the third major demonstration of its kind. But this specific protest was entirely different. This one was unprecedented in all of American history. The sheer, overwhelming scale was absolutely staggering. More than 3,100 massive demonstrations took place simultaneously. There was an active event in almost every American county. Millions of furious people poured out of their homes. They marched aggressively in deeply red conservative states. They marched proudly in deeply blue liberal states. They marched in forgotten rural towns and wealthy suburbs. They even marched in an Alaskan city inside the Arctic Circle. The crowd estimates were absolutely breathtaking to witness. Up to 20 million Americans stood shoulder to shoulder. It was the largest sustained protest movement ever recorded. The administration was completely frozen in absolute fear. They simply did not know how to stop the massive tide. In the past, they had deployed threatening military drills. They tried to violently intimidate the crowds with heavy force. They ran completely deranged, heavily funded counter-programming. But the American people were no longer afraid. They marched boldly for universal, accessible healthcare. They marched fiercely for union rights and basic human dignity. They desperately wanted to protect targeted, marginalized communities. They demanded a functional future built on actual humanity. And the symbolic leader of this moment finally stepped forward. Robert De Niro did not just passively march. He took the microphone in the heart of Washington. He spoke powerfully at the prestigious National Press Club. The massive event was pointedly called the State of the Swamp. It was a direct, brutal counter to the State of the Union. De Niro looked out at the completely silent crowd. He did not read safely from a teleprompter. His unscripted words were completely raw and devastating. His gravelly voice echoed through the massive, breathless room. He asked a devastating, totally ice-cold question. Can you love a country that pardons violent criminals? Can you love a country that willfully protects pedophiles? The entire room was completely, utterly speechless. He said he felt deeply betrayed by his own nation. He aggressively demanded a return to actual American values. But the most emotional, shocking moment was yet to come. De Niro appeared on Nicole Wallace's popular political podcast. He was asked a chilling, direct question about the future. Wallace asked if Trump would ever willingly step down. De Niro did not hesitate for a single, solitary second. He delivered a brutal, terrifying warning to the public. "No way! He won't leave," De Niro firmly stated. "Let's not kid ourselves. He will not leave." He said the American people had to physically force him out. Then Wallace gently brought up De Niro's legendary past. She mentioned his famous 1981 Oscar speech for Raging Bull. She reminded him of his lifelong desire to lift people up. That is exactly when the ultimate tough guy finally broke. The pure memories crashed into the devastating dark present. His iconic eyes filled rapidly with heavy, uncontrollable tears. His voice cracked into a deeply painful, agonizing whisper. He said, "You simply have to bring people together." He said, "You cannot ever win by violently dividing the country." He pointed directly to the endless chaos in the White House. He called the corrupt administration a truly destructive force. He wept openly for the broken soul of America. The public reaction was immediate and completely explosive. The emotional clip of De Niro crying went completely viral. It deeply resonated with millions of exhausted, terrified citizens. They saw their own hidden pain reflected in his tears. The raw vulnerability was incredibly, undeniably powerful. But the sitting president could not handle the devastating optics. Donald Trump lashed out viciously on Truth Social. He launched a completely desperate, unhinged public attack. He called De Niro a totally sick and demented person. He aggressively insulted the legendary actor's intelligence. He mocked the genuine tears exactly like a schoolyard bully. He said De Niro cried much like a weak child would do. It was a pathetic, transparent display of extreme insecurity. The American public saw the stark contrast instantly. One man openly wept for the deep suffering of others. The other man cruelly mocked pain to hide his own terror. The brutal attacks only fueled the massive, growing protests. The unified crowds in the streets grew even larger and louder. The independent media aggressively amplified the entire movement. The Midas Touch Network broadcasted the events completely live. They showed the beautiful, joyous, undeniable reality of the crowds. There were massive, uplifting musical performances everywhere. There was peaceful, overwhelming, incredible political unity. There were thousands of former Trump supporters joining the march. They finally realized they had been completely, utterly conned. They saw the sickening cover-up of the Epstein files. They saw the intentional, methodical destruction of the middle class. They realized the ruthless administration only cared about itself. They remembered how the FCC had threatened Jimmy Kimmel. They remembered how the government tried to silence its critics, but Kimmel had proudly returned to the television screen. He refused to bow to the completely unhinged authoritarian threats. He stood his ground and brought De Niro along with him. The regime was visibly crumbling under the weight of reality. The massive Midas Touch community expanded across the globe, from Midas Canada to Europe to Asia and to Africa. The international solidarity was absolutely impossible to ignore. The people were finally, aggressively taking their massive power back. The era of intimidation was coming to a brutal end. The cold robots are marching quietly through the White House. The dark files remain heavily stained with elite, unforgivable secrets. And a Hollywood legend openly wept for a severely broken nation. But out on the crowded streets, the fear and silence are completely over. Millions of brave Americans have finally found their unbreakable voice. The tide is aggressively turning, and a new history is being written today. If you think the truth still matters, hit that like button and aggressively subscribe, because this is just the absolute beginning.